Good morning, everybody. Well, we've had the sad news overnight, not unexpected, but sad nonetheless, of the passing of Dame Tessa Jowell, and I will, later on in this hour, play a tribute to her. She will, of course, be remembered above all for the successful 2012 London Olympics, and she was very much in charge of that bid that we won. We've not had a World Cup for many years here, but we did have an Olympics, and she was a very, very big part of that. Now, overnight, tonight, the Prime Minister has written an article that appeared in the Sunday Times and has now gone out this morning on Facebook. What does the Prime Minister say? She says, "You can trust me to deliver. I would ensure we take back control of our borders. I would ensure that we take back control of our money. I would ensure that we take back control of our laws. We will leave the single market. I will safeguard the interests of the British fishing industry, and we will leave the customs union." So it's a reiteration of what she does in the big speeches like Lancaster House, and she sends out this message to 17.5 million Brexiteers and to people like me, and we say, oh, thank goodness, she's still on track. She still believes in Brexit, and then we tend to be somewhat disappointed after these big statements by her delivery. But what is interesting this time is not the fact that she said these things. What is interesting this time is she's got real problems over the customs union, not just because the House of Lords have sent this back to the House of Commons, but because the Labour Party now clearly say we should be part of a customs union. And that's a view that quite a few Tory rebels hold as well. She's in trouble. She's in really very big trouble. She could, at some point in the next week, month, lose a vote in the House of Commons over us leaving the customs union. If that happens, one of her major red lines would have been crossed. She could be in big trouble, which is why I think this article ends with, "I will need your help and support to get there. And in return, my pledge to you is simple. I will not let you down." Why would she need your support? That's us, folks. Why would she need our support and help? Well, because I think, very possibly, she faces the prospect of another general election. She's hardly going to call another referendum. I mean, that would tear her cabinet and her party to pieces. How do you feel, folks, about the prospect of another general election? Now, last time this happened, Brenda from Bristol became quite famous. This is what she said.
"You're joking. Not another one? Oh, for God's sake, I can't stand this. There's too much politics going on at the moment. Why does she need to do it?"
Well, there you are. So maybe you feel like Brenda from Bristol. Maybe you think another general election is more than you can bear. And if that's how you feel, call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, do you know what? If she gets this one right, wins a big majority, then maybe actually we can get Brexit. The House of Lords can go to hell, and we won't have Ramonas on our radios, airwaves and TV screens every day. Or maybe you feel that whatever fine word she gives in these speeches, actually, her heart's not really in it, and she's in this mess because of her own lack of leadership, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course, you can watch us live on Facebook, comment there too. Now, that's what I think. I think she's preparing the ground for a general election. That's my view. To find out whether I'm on the right track, or maybe barking up completely the wrong tree, let's get an independent view, and let's go to Professor Matthew Goodwin, Professor of Politics at the University of Kent and a Senior Fellow at Chatham House. Matthew, good morning.
Good morning.
How much trouble is the Prime Minister in?
She is in a great deal of trouble. She's got a divided cabinet. She's now faced 14 defeats in the House of Lords on Brexit-related motions. And crucially, she's got an opposition against Brexit that is mobilising to a greater extent than it has done until this point. So I think May's back really is up against the wall. And what happens over the next 2-3 weeks when those all-important defeats in the House of Lords come back to the Commons for a crunch vote? I mean, I'm not going to mince my words on this. I genuinely believe that Britain could be thrust into a constitutional crisis. I think if the motion that the Lords has passed to keep Britain in the European Economic Area, or the EEA, if that comes back to the Commons and is endorsed by MPs who basically oppose Brexit, then the people are not going to get what they asked for in the referendum vote. They're not going to get freedom from the courts. They're not going to get reform of free movement. They're not really going to get any of the key crunch changes that they needed. And I think that is going to hammer home to a large chunk of the British electorate that actually what they expressed in June 2016 has now been thwarted by an establishment elite. And that's very dangerous territory for a country to be in.
Yeah, I have to say that what I sense, Matthew, and whether I'm putting diesel in the car or buying my newspapers or whatever it is, people coming up to me now with a great sense of urgency, almost verging on anger, saying, is this actually going to happen? Difficult to know, though, isn't it, in a country like this, how that anger would manifest itself?
Well, indeed, if you are a frustrated Leave voter, you said, look, I haven't got anything I wanted so far on the transition, I haven't got anything I wanted on the budget payments, I'm still giving billions of pounds to the EU, I didn't get what I wanted on fisheries, I didn't get what I wanted on farming, I've yet to see any reform of immigration. Where are you going to go at that next election if indeed Theresa May goes down this road? Are you going to, keep your chips on the Conservative Party, knowing everything you've known until this point? Are you going to stay at home and you're going to be apathetic? And that's a real risk to the Leave vote, that actually Leavers just give up on democracy. They say, we tried this referendum, it didn't work. Or are they going to mobilise around something like, the UK Independence Party or something like that? I think one of the fascinating facts about British politics to me right now is that when you look at how volatile people are at elections, how quickly they're moving from one party to the other. There was a study last week that showed British politics has never been this volatile in its history.
I'm sure that's
More
right.
voters going from one party to another. I think that's fascinating, but also makes everything completely unpredictable.
And of course, a Conservative Party in trouble over Brexit with divisions should be manna from heaven for the Labour Party, but of course, actually, they've got a problem with their base too, haven't they?
The Brexit vote cut through the Labour electorate like a hot knife through butter. The London, university towns, metropolitan, middle-class areas held by Labour voted Remain. Kensington and Chelsea, won by Labour last year, a 65% Remain vote. But just go up to Doncaster, the northern industrial seats, parts of Wales as well. You're looking at seats that back Brexit by 70%. Interestingly, I noticed that Caroline Flint, 10 days ago, a Labour MP from the north, wrote an op-ed in one of the papers saying Labour cannot betray these voters because she is sensing what is happening north of Watford, which I think is a great deal of voter unease over where their party stands on this issue too.
I think Frank Field, too, from Birkenhead, is getting much the same feeling, that Labour's in problems as well. So put yourself, Professor Goodwin, in Theresa May's shoes. A vote happens in the House of Commons in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and given that there are now more Conservatives prepared to rebel against their own party than there are Labour MPs prepared to rebel against their own party, she loses a vote. As I see it, she then has 3 choices. 1, she resigns as Prime Minister, but who on earth would want their career to end like that? 2, she says, right, we've got to fix this once and for all. We've got to have another referendum. But I don't think the country wants that, and I think that would do just such damage to the Conservative Party as an organisation that I can't see her opting for that. Matthew, I think she's got to go for a general election in that situation.
I think it's entirely plausible that we have, what would be the 5th major election in as many years in this country, from those 2014 European elections all the way through the general elections and the referendums. I think the problem is that if you're being generous and you are taking the most generous interpretation from the opinion polls, only about 38% of the country say they're open to a second referendum. So it's incredibly, it hasn't got the majority support that you'd need. If she resigns, of course, which I think is highly possible, then it is almost guaranteed, given the Conservative membership and the Conservative electorate, that the next leader is a Leaver, who is going to deliver I think a more meaningful Brexit than May has managed until now. If you look at those polls of the Conservative memberships, they're saying they want a a Rees-Mogg, or they want somebody like that, of somebody who hasn't really minced words on the issue. But if we end up in a general election territory, I mean, everything's to play for. Everything's to play for. You look at those local elections last week, the Conservatives were doing very well against Labour in pro-Leave territory, and Labour were doing very well in pro-Remain London territory. The country is split down the middle. I think, there would be risks in that vote too.
Yes.
That we are incredibly divided as a nation. I think she'd have to think very seriously about who runs that campaign, because their last campaign was an utter disaster. And I think she'd have to somehow come up with a message that can unify the kind of the Leave element of the party and the Remain element. Otherwise, we're going to see big chunks of this Tory brand branching off and joining others. Yeah, no, absolutely. Professor Goodwin, thank you for joining me on this Sunday morning. And please don't go too far away. I think we might need you over the course of the next few weeks. And clearly, as Matthew Goodwin just said, folks, British politics and British voters now more volatile than they've been at any point in modern history. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Mrs. May writes on Facebook, "Trust me, and I'll take back control. I will deliver what you wanted in that referendum, but I'll need your help to do it." And I am speculating that we could be very much closer to a general election than anybody had previously thought. But before I get back to that, we got the news overnight that Dame Tessa Jowell had died. She was diagnosed with former brain cancer about a year ago. You might remember 2 or 3 months back she spoke in the House of Lords about NHS treatment of people with that condition, and she got a standing ovation in the House of Lords, which I'm not sure has ever happened before in the history of that place. Let's go to Theo Usherwood as he looks back at her life and career.
The International Olympic Committee has the honour of announcing that the Games of the 30th Olympiad in 2012 are awarded to the city of London.
Nothing is going to stop us savouring this moment of having won the Olympic Games for London. There's a lot of hard work ahead, but I'll tell you, we're squared up, we're ready for it, and we have prepared for this moment.
July the 6th, 2005 was undoubtedly Tessa Jowell's finest moment, as London won the right to host the Olympics. Tony Blair had trusted her to deliver the Games, and she succeeded where many others had failed. But less than 24 hours later, elation turned to horror.
We just had a big explosion. There appears to be something ahead of the train in the track.
Breaking news we're getting from the PA Newswire that there's been reports of an explosion outside Liverpool Street Station. That, of course, in the East End of London.
Sean, can you hear me?
Hope you can hear this.
Sean?
Hello, Miss Kirk?
Yeah, hi, Sean. Can you tell us where you were and what happened?
Tessa, as Minister for London, was at the centre of the government's response, a moment she shared with the former Prime Minister in an interview for LBC 10 years on.
I remember sitting in the room having a bilateral discussion with the President of China when someone came in and handed me a slip of paper which said there's been an incident in London and you're going to have to come out of the meeting quickly.
Born in central London on September the 17th, 1947, Tessa initially trained as a psychiatric social worker at Goldsmiths College. It was not long, however, before she inevitably found her way into politics, first as a Labour councillor in Camden, before she was elected as MP for Dulwich and West Norwood in 1992. 5 years later, Tony Blair swept to a landslide victory. Tessa had the chance to make her mark. After ministerial stints at both health and education, she became Culture Secretary in 2001. In Cabinet, she was an arch Blairite, and sometimes even joked about the lengths to which she would go in order to protect her boss.
My mum told me that you said that you would jump under a bus for Tony Blair. Would you still jump under a bus for Tony Blair?
That was a joke. It was a joke at the time that I said it. But Tony is a very good friend of mine, and even though he's not Prime Minister, I see him. I admire him enormously.
Tessa Jowell's career was, however, not without controversy. In 2004, she was accused of getting too close to the gambling industry, as the government planned to introduce super casinos, a move that was eventually blocked. In 2007, Tony Blair stepped aside for Gordon Brown, but Tessa's political career survived, as she continued to lead Labour's Olympics brief, both in government and in opposition.
But of course, it's not just a celebration for London, but a celebration for the whole of the UK. Because the Olympics will be held in the largest new urban park in Europe.
After the Olympics, Tessa retired to the backbenches. It was of course an open secret she was not quite ready to retire. There was one last job she had set her sights on.
I wanted to come here to tell you, just in case you didn't know, and so it's official, that I'm standing to be Labour's candidate to be the next mayor, your mayor, the next mayor of London.
By the time the contest for Labour candidate to be mayor of London came around, Jeremy Corbyn was on the verge of being elected leader. The party was shifting to the left, and Tessa was the Blairite. The result? Inevitable.
Sadiq Khan has won more than 50% of the votes cast in the round, and I'm therefore delighted to declare Sadiq Khan selected as Labour candidate for the Mayor of London. Sadiq, come and take the floor.
Tessa Jowell's style of politics may seem like an anathema to many now in Westminster. Collegiate, warm, funny, she made friends in order to fulfil her ambitions. This was never truer than when, having been diagnosed with brain cancer, she battled tirelessly to secure better treatment for fellow sufferers. A campaign she fought with typical bravery and courage to the very end.
I hope that this debate will give hope to other cancer patients like me, so that we can live well together with cancer, not just dying of it. All of us, for longer. Thank you.
Well, that package was put together by LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood, and I thought was a very fitting tribute to the life and career of Dame Tessa Jowell. Joining me for comment is Andrew Pearce, columnist, consultant editor for the Daily Mail, and of course LBC presenter on Fridays from 7 till 10. Andrew, as a person watcher in Westminster, she appears to have been a very popular figure.
Yeah, there's few like her, Nigel, actually. Everyone knows my politics, but she and I got on incredibly well. I would say she was a proper friend, a mate. I was always struck by her commitment to her cause. She was a passionate Blairite, a passionate supporter of the European Union. You and I would disagree with her on a lot of that, of course. But she did it with real conviction. And it's not an understatement to say, Nigel, she probably was the nicest politician, the nicest cabinet minister I ever met. She got on incredibly well with everybody. Relations weren't always brilliant with Gordon Brown, it has to be said, when she was in the cabinet, but to the end her friendship with Tony Blair endured. He was very close to her right to the end, as was Alistair Campbell, as was Charlie Faulkner, the former Lord Chancellor. They were devoted to her and she was devoted to them, and it was pretty clear in the last week or so things were getting pretty bad. My understanding is she went to Warwickshire, where David Mills, her husband, had a cottage where they spent much wonderful time together, and they lost her, of course, as we know, yesterday. But that's where she'd have wanted to be, in Warwickshire, with her family around her, and she died very peacefully. Thank God for that.
And Andrew, I guess the London Olympics is really going to be her lasting legacy, isn't it?
There's no doubt about it, and Blair put a lot of trust in her on that. She had to get a cross-party consensus for it. She was exactly the sort of person that could do that. She was committed to London. She'd been a London MP all her life. She'd been a Camden councillor way back in the 1970s, and she was able to bring all sorts of people into the mix, people like David Beckham, members of the royal family, because she mixed effortlessly with these people, and she would say it was her great enjoyment achievement. She was very disappointed not to become the mayoral candidate in London, but she was swept away, Nigel, by the left-wing surge for Jeremy Corbyn. I saw her on the morning in which the votes were due to be counted. She hadn't even then quite realised how bad her position was. She knew things had changed because for so long she'd been the runaway candidate to be the Mayor of London. She'd have done a great job, and it's not the time to score political points because Sadiq Khan is Sadiq Khan, but I think she would have been a fantastic Mayor of London and quite good for London to have a woman mayor.
Do you have any idea how she felt about that change in the Labour Party?
She was deeply alarmed by it, deeply disturbed, because she thought, while she admired Jeremy Corbyn for his conviction to his politics, she saw how Jeremy Corbyn had been a consistent enemy and rebel in everything Tony Blair's Labour government had tried to do.
Hundreds of times.
Hundreds of times. I think, in fact, by the time he became Labour leader, he rebelled about 560 times. I think I once managed to point out that Jeremy Corbyn had voted against Blair more often than David Cameron referendum, which was quite an achievement. So she was pretty upset by that, but she accepted it. She said that's politics, but she was pretty sure of this, Nigel. She said the pendulum will swing back, and we see in the papers today David Miliband, who of course she was enormously close to and wanted to win the Labour leadership over Ed Miliband, that he's making some form of comeback tomorrow on the Brexit and the European Union. But I did used to say to Tessa, I think the Corbyn revolution has got quite a long way to run yet, and she agreed with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. That was Andrew Pearce, columnist, consultant editor for the Daily Mail, and of course LBC presenter on Friday nights from 7 till 10, saying that Dame Tessa Jowell was the nicest cabinet minister he'd ever met in his long career in Westminster. And that really is it not, a very, very strong, nice thing of Andrew to have said. OK, I'm going to get back after the break. We're going to talk about my idea that when the Prime Minister says, trust me, I'll take back control, but I'll need your help, she's actually getting us ready for a general election. There are some who think if she loses this vote on the Customs Union and House of Commons, she'll just resign and walk away. I'm not so sure. One or two comments coming in. Keith says to me, Mrs May, asking us to trust her to deliver Brexit. I wouldn't trust Calamity Jane to deliver a pint of milk. Let's get this in perspective. If Theresa May doesn't deliver, then she is a traitor and she should go. We don't need another election. We really don't. We Brexiteers only have so much patience. If she was genuine, she'd walk away, says Kathy. Well, Kathy, I'm very frustrated by where we are with Brexit, and I have to say, my view is this is very much down to a lack of leadership on her part. I said this almost every evening last week on the show, and I was pleased to read in today's Sunday Telegraph, Simon Heffer, very strong on this point. He says the PM's lack of leadership is ruining everything. She's in a very, very tight spot. It's difficult. She faces the prospect, perhaps, of losing a major vote in the House of Commons. There may well be another general election. Oh no, not another one, I hear you say. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. The Prime Minister's in big trouble. The House of Lords 14 times have defeated government legislation on leaving the European Union. What will the House of Commons do? The government beginning to fear they may well lose a vote over the Customs Union. And I think in this article published by the Prime Minister this morning, when she says, trust me, I'll take back control, but I'll need your help to do it, I think she's getting us ready for another general election. And I'm asking you, would you support that? I get on Twitter from one person, no, and from another, yes. I get by text from Tony, May will ruin the Tories. Well, the problem, of course, is the Tory party is very, very split on Brexit. That's the truth. Let's go to Chris in Colchester. Good morning, Chris.
Morning, Nigel.
So,
I think you could be right, and I think if the establishment is going to call another election, I think the main purpose will be to remove Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, like they tried desperately to do during the council elections, but it didn't quite go their way. I think if there is another election, I don't think May thinks she's going to win a majority. I think there'll pretty much be a stalemate, and then there'll be calls saying, look, the Corbyn train stopped, blah, 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 we need to get rid of him. Because the most dangerous thing to the Blairites and the people who want to thwart this referendum is Jeremy Corbyn. It's not Theresa May, because they know he will not back down.
Well, you say that, Chris. You say that, Chris, but it's a funny one, isn't it? Because Jeremy Corbyn, the man, has been as opposed to all the European treaties over a long parliamentary career as I've been. But as leader of the Labour Party, he's in charge of a group of people in the House of Commons who are mostly fanatically pro-European Union. So, Chris, the Labour Party position has softened a lot on this, hasn't it? I mean, they're now saying, and it's pretty much official policy, that they want us to remain part of a customs union. But Emily Thornberry last week said the customs union.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is he's got so many backstabbers and people in his party. He's trying to play all sides a bit. But, I mean, if he really wanted to back down, he could easily just completely kowtow to them, and he would have all of them on his side. He'd have everyone on his side then, but he will not do that. And I think that does show backbone. But I still can't understand why Theresa May is the Prime Minister. I mean, she was a horrific Home Secretary. If I was flipping burgers at McDonald's and gave 500 people food poisoning and then made Health and Safety Manager, there would be something quite wrong about it.
Yes, I don't think her record as Home Secretary was particularly distinguished either. Chris, if there was a snap general election, do you think it would result in a hung Parliament once again?
Yeah, I think people know that as well. I really think it would be pretty much a stalemate, maybe a couple of seats here and there.
OK, all right, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Cliff, who's calling from Hayes. Good morning, Cliff.
Morning, Nigel.
So, have I got this right, Cliff, or not?
For once, Nigel, I usually agree with you on everything, but I don't think so this time.
OK.
And the reasoning being, there's one thing that the Tories prize above all else, and that's power. The country doesn't matter, nothing matters, only power.
Mm-hmm.
If they go to the country now, as your last caller just said, it's likely to be a hung parliament. The only reason they called the election last time, which I actually saw coming, was because they had a 20-point lead in the polls. They'd just taken Copeland, and they had 12 or 13 MPs facing investigation over their electoral wins.
They certainly did, yeah. Yeah,
including in your seat.
I know, but there's going to be that actually, Cliff, I can say that particular seat is going to be going to trial tomorrow, but I can't say any more than that. But Cliff, yeah, I mean there were lots of reasons why they called it last time. It didn't work, and without the DUP, she wouldn't be there at all, frankly. But Cliff, yeah, they want to keep power, but what if she was to lose a vote on the customs union and then say, I accept the will of the House of Commons, we are actually going to stay part of the customs union? I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg and the 60 members of the European Research Group and millions of Conservative voters would say, if that's the case, we simply can't support you.
Yeah, but in which point I think they'd pull May down rather than go to the country.
Right, so you think a leadership election's more likely?
Very much so, yeah.
Okay.
They'll get rid of her first to protect their seats and keep themselves in power until the actual outlook is a lot more favourable for them getting an overall majority. Because there's no way they get an overall majority at the moment. It would, I agree with your last caller, it would be a hung parliament, and they do not want that at any cost.
Yeah, I mean, they could be thinking that the results that they saw in those local elections perhaps indicate that Labour's Corbyn's bubble has burst to a certain amount, and that they position themselves as the party for Brexit, for leaving the single market, for leaving the customs union, for being tough on immigration. I mean, hey, Cliff, we hear this from the lots of elections. They don't often deliver. And maybe they think by going to the country with that ticket, that in fact that would expose Corbyn's Labour Party, particularly on immigration, on which they're incredibly weak. That's the calculation, Cliff, isn't it?
It is, and also they'll be looking at it as rather the devil you know, because a lot of people don't trust Jeremy Corbyn on anything. I mean, he's flip-flopped. The policies they're putting forward, like last week, where he was saying that all the Royal Navy ships will be built in Britain, but they want to keep us in the customs union. You can't do that. If you're in the customs union, you obey the rules.
Yes.
It's got to go out to tender.
Yes, I heard...
All that kind of stuff gets exposed.
I heard Liam Fox speaking about this over the weekend, saying as a former defence secretary, the fact those ships are being built in South Korea is because of EU procurement rules. Yet another reason, Cliff, for us to break free, in my view. Thank you. Well, Cliff thinks I'm wrong. He thinks that if this vote is lost, May is got rid of. He may well be right. Peter is calling from West Hampstead. Good morning, Peter.
Hello, Nigel. I think it is immensely dishonest to imagine that you can turn a general election into a sort of a one-issue deal. You can't. I mean, a general election is about health, schools, defence, transport. Should we tax and spend or provide austerity? You can't... General election is a format which you cannot force into a one-issue...
It's interesting, Peter. Yeah, I mean, isn't it, if we think back to the election last year in June, she started off, if you remember, saying this is the Brexit means Brexit general election, and then within a couple of weeks she was dragged into debating absolutely everything else.
You absolutely have to. And the other thing to remember is that Brexit does not split down party lines, and they just can't handle this. They've got no mechanism, they've got no logic, they've got no vocabulary. I mean, if you take the Liberal Democrats, for instance, 2 years ago they had a major poll of their members, and they're refusing to provide the answers, even to their own members. And so the Liberal Democrats are split down the middle, and they're trying to cover this up. The party system doesn't allow for...
Well, it's the electoral system, Peter, isn't it? If we didn't have first past the post, British politics would be in a completely different shape. But we do have first past the post. Maybe, I mean, Peter, do you think, looking, I mean, a year, two down the road, do you ever think it's possible there could be a major realignment of these two big parties?
I think there could be a formation of a middle party, taking the sensible people from the Labour and the sensible people from the Tories. But if one does the sums, if there was proportional representation under a good system, not the Mickey Mouse nonsense that was proposed in 2011.
Oh, I know.
Corbyn would be in power now.
That's if people voted the same way, and of course people do vote. I mean, you know, take the UKIP vote, Peter. When I was leader, when it was a European election and contested on PR, a lot more people were prepared to vote UKIP than they were under first past the post. So having a different system can shift the vote.
Oh, it can. I mean, it's absolutely stunning what the alterations to the last 3 or 4 general elections would have been if, as you say, people don't alter their voting decision. I mean, we would have had Jeremy Corbyn and we would have had the Liberal Democrats in an awkward position, but they would probably have sided with him.
Yeah.
I mean, even the year before, when you got that massive roll of support, you would have had, I think, 85 MPs.
Yes.
And there is a possibility that UKIP might have split.
Well, I think
two factions.
Peter, the truth is that we got 4 million votes under the first past the post system. I think under PR, given the levels of support UKIP had, we might have got 6 million votes. We might have won 120, 130 seats. But hey, that's looking back. Peter, thank you very much indeed for your call. On Facebook, Tanis says 17.4 million is behind Brexit. How much more help does May need? Well, but again, you see, if you listen to this show regularly, Tanis, I keep saying, if you go out there and take the country with you, you'll find the parliamentary numbers improve. Steve says May's lost the plot. Rob says Corbyn has no power over Labour. And Rob, I think when it comes to European policy, he doesn't have much. He did put his foot down and you know, sack a front bencher, and he does not want Labour to be campaigning for a second referendum. But when it comes to the customs union and even on the single market, he's given away a lot of ground. Mrs May writes this morning, trust me and I'll take back control, but I'll need your help to do it. And I think she's getting us ready for a general election, and I'm asking you whether you support that. But before we go back to that, overnight a knife-wielding assailant killed 1 person and injured 4 others in a lively neighbourhood near Paris's famed opera. He was killed by the police. Let's find out more about this incident by going to Peter Allen, LBC's Paris correspondent. Peter, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Yes, another horrendous terrorist attack. They've become all too familiar, really, in the city since early 2015. In this case, the attacker has now been named. I can tell you, Nigel, his name is Kazmat Asinov. He was born in Chechnya, and he arrived in the country, that is to say, France, in the early 2000s, during that period where those terrible wars going on in Chechnya. But he was a political refugee, now aged, he was 21 until he was shot dead yesterday. But also, I can tell you that he was on a watch list. He was considered a threat to national security. The RRG, the security agents over here, had flagged him up, and yet he was given the freedom to spend 9 minutes stabbing people in central Paris on a Saturday night.
So it took 9 minutes for the French police?
9 minutes before they got there, yes. The first call was at 8:47, and it was soon after 9 o'clock that the police finally arrived. So yes, he had a full 9 minutes.
I'm amazed.
People couldn't identify him to begin with. They thought he might be in a restaurant. They thought he might be out on the street. And he was only actually caught because they stopped him for control, for routine control. So by this time, it got rid of his knife and was trying to get away.
I mean, I'm amazed because actually whenever I go to Paris, or even Brussels these days, I see soldiers and policemen carrying guns virtually everywhere.
They're all over the place, but in the end it has to be rather tokenistic. France is a very, very big country. Paris is a very big capital city.
Yeah.
And even if you have 4 soldiers with their guns out in one street, 2 streets away, 3 streets away, there'll be no soldiers at all. So this is the point. It can only be tokenistic, that kind of security.
Do you anticipate any political sort of backwash from this, given that this 21-year-old was already on a watch list?
Well, there will be. There'll be the usual. Marine Le Pen is already up in arms about the whole thing. Clearly, there'll be lots of talk about what can be done to monitor people on these watch lists. But of course, we've got about 40,000 on these watch lists.
Wow.
Again, it takes about 20 officers or whatever to follow somebody day in, day out. You can't have everybody being followed. It's one of these situations that's very, very difficult to deal with.
Yep, and all too familiar. Peter Allen, thank you. That was LBC's Paris correspondent reporting on that knife attack that took place in Paris's famed opera area yesterday. Back to Theresa May, the problem she faces, and the fact that I think she's getting us ready for a general election. Some think that's wrong. Some think if she loses the vote on the customs union, that will actually trigger a leadership election within the Conservative Party. What is for certain is the earthquake of Brexit. The aftershocks of that are far, far from over. What's the point of another election, I get on Twitter? There would have to be another leader, and that isn't on the cards. Mrs May will not deliver. Well, a lot of Brexiteers feel Mrs May will not deliver, despite her fine words this morning. But not delivering is actually not an option, because her own supporters and about 60 of her own MPs would not put up with it. On Twitter, I get, why not another referendum on the final deal? She can't keep having elections till she gets the result she wants, can she? Well, we'll see. Yes, given the right opportunity and backing, I get. So some of you think, actually, it might be a good idea. I don't know. What does Matthew in Heathrow think? Good morning, Matthew.
Morning, Nigel. Basically, I'm sure Theresa May is not going to risk another general election, but as the cabinet is split, I think she's going to have possibly a referendum on the hard or the soft Brexit, what they are discussing once they get the two separate deals worked out with Europe.
So you think she'd give us a referendum where we're asked, do we support this model or that model, yeah?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I mean, I remain effective with leaving, but I think the model where basically we're going to have some sort of partnership with the customs union, is the solution.
Well, there are lots of people, Matthew, with very different ideas to that, but some that support that view. But Matthew, I mean, if she's seen to call a second referendum, isn't that also going to cause huge internal divisions? Isn't the only thing that can unite her party beating Labour in a general election?
Well, no. I mean, I think she's not going to risk that. I mean, basically, until they sort out the deal with the EU, and I think the cabinet is split, it looks like they're going to be looking at two separate deals, and then once they get these two separate hard or soft Brexit sorted, they will then put it to the people, because they want to stay in power, and they're not going to risk the election until they have to. OK,
Matthew, thank you. Matthew thinks the second referendum is far more likely. Amanda says on Twitter, I don't trust her at all about anything. Totally untrustworthy. Amanda, how can you say that when the Prime Minister writes, I will ensure we take back control of our borders. I will ensure we take back control of our money. I will ensure we take back control of our laws. We will leave the single market. We will leave the customs union. We will safeguard the interests of the British fishing industry. Amanda, the trouble is, she keeps on saying this about once every 6 months, and then conceding. What does Dave in Hammersmith make of all of this?
Hi. I think she has a three-pronged attack here.
Okay.
First of all, she's got to deal with the 20 amendments that the unelected House of Lords have bolted on to this legislation. And she needs to send a message to them that they will lose their power if they don't behave. So basically she's saying, I'm prepared to go to the country on this, and she can, and so basically it's the first salvo, if you like, towards them to say, look, I'm prepared to do this. My feeling is that the second part of that would be that that would be the time when she did a handover to Boris Johnson, and that's the other threat. So what she can say to those same people is, these are my two options. I'll do that. The third thing she can do is that she can say, look, last time we really messed up on the elderly. We were telling them they're going to have to lose their houses for their care. We haven't got that anymore. It's very different from a local election. I think we'd swing it with enough of a majority to not have to depend on the DUP. And I think that's really the way she's going. I think it's really mostly about threatening against these traitors in her own party who aren't, voting with the country. Because
you see them as traitors, Dave, do you?
I think. Look, I didn't vote for this, but it's democracy. And that's the thing you have to believe in. You have to believe that if that's what the people voted, to say they're ignorant or they didn't know this or they didn't know that...
It's horrible, isn't it?
It is, and I saw one of the lords said, I don't remember this customs union being mentioned. It came through every door in the country.
Yeah.
It was on that little white piece of paper. So,
yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's not my thing, but we can't keep having referendums on this, that, and the other. We have to say we had the referendum. It was told that it would be a once in a generation referendum. That, there were lies on both sides, or exaggerations, or whatever you want to call them. But at the end of the day, this is about her saying, "I'm prepared to go to the country on it." And that's the other thing she might do. She might say, "You know what? I'm going to put this back in your hands. I'm going for a Brexit, a hard Brexit. You can't trust Corbyn for anything. You never have been able to. He's a turncoat of his own party, a stooge for the Russians, and an apologist at the very best."
Well, she would say all of those things. But, Dave, the idea that she could just hand over to Boris Johnson is something I'm going to challenge. I'm not so sure Boris is that popular amongst the Parliamentary Conservative Party these days.
It's a scare tactic. It's a scare tactic.
Just purely a scare tactic. Right, fine. No, OK. If it's not me, it's him. He'd be even worse. Get it, Dave? I thank you. Let's get comment from Anthony in Staines. Good morning, Anthony.
Good morning, Nigel. Well, I think if she goes for it, she can certainly win a general election, because look at the polls. She's holding up despite all the problems, the horrendous problems she's faced.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen the Times last week, 43% Labour, 38% or something?
Yep.
But I think there's two things she needs to do before then, and one of them is to get rid of Davis. I think he's dreadfully weak as a Brexit secretary. There's no energy there whatsoever.
He does look a bit beaten up sometimes, doesn't he?
Yes, I mean, she needs to get someone like you in there. Now, that's an idea, isn't it?
Oh, I'd love to do it, Anthony, but I'm afraid she won't even lower herself to speak to me. I mean, I'm not part of the party. I'm not a fully paid up member of the tribe, and that, I'm afraid, is how politics works, Anthony. Isn't David Davis isn't his problem that he's not allowed to do what he wants to do? He's doing what the cabinet tells him.
Well, yes, because she's got Philip Hammond there, she's got the likes of Nicky Morgan, but I think she really needs to go on the attack. What the country will respect is a really firm approach to this. And
well, I couldn't agree more. Anthony, I've got to go. Time's moving on. I agree with Anthony. She would not be in this mess if, apart from making the odd very good speech, if she was actually delivering on some of it and showing leadership, she wouldn't be where she is, in my view.